the business rules, and I can see situations where you want to aggregate data from other systems at a higher level to a higher system, and you might cut yourself off and say, I shouldn't invoke that business rule back down there because now I can't see what I want to see. Is that a common problem? Do you anticipate that you're going to have to reconfigure or it gets smarter so you can move your business rules to a higher level decision-making system and not at the endpoint? Just curious about that.
So what we do is run scenarios, and we try to run as many scenarios as we can, and then use automated reasoning, so we don't have like a ladder logic type lock-in, and then the system still can. It depends on whether where you want the human in the loop to be, but so that's the idea. Using automated reasoning, writing those rules, and yeah, you're right. You're going to have to re-script it, but the idea is to get everybody possible. Get all that gray matter together in the room and start scripting out all those scenarios based on what you see are issues, whether they're maintenance issues or whether they're security issues.
Sally, did you want to add any commentary?
We see that happen all over the place. So and you don't know who I am. I'm Sally Fernandez. I'm president of Safety Dynamics. Our situation when we started with the company was, of course, very applied to municipalities, right? Crime in municipalities. And, to the point of your question, what we've learned is we've started to apply it to commercial applications that you're right, whether it's a security matter or something else, sometimes there needs to be sort of a layering. And we find ourselves exactly in the situation that Chuck mentioned. Examples, I can't tell you who, but one of the big 5 intel agencies we're working with, and we're working on those kinds of scenarios of what can happen in their situation, because obviously they have all of the protective forces that they need, but when it comes to security breaches and things in their system, they've got to deal with both access to information as well as the fact that I've got a crime going on at the same time. And so we have to do that layering and have to do those scenarios and play them out and see what would happen, and how do we then push our information just to the immediate point of where they have the ability to then control what they want their rules to be internally, right? And so it is a layering effect, and you do have to go through that process to do that. It's not as simple as and even in a municipality, it's the same kind of thing, just slightly different, right? In the sense that, do I send out a call immediately because I've got a detection, or do I inject human factors? Do I inject some other rules that are in my background system here of, if it's in this area, this is what I do. So it's not too different than what happens even in a municipality.
I'd like to add one thing: modeling. Being able to use a different modeling software, process control modeling, the security modeling that we just showed you here, to be able to put those models together and run those might help too.
Dave, any other commentary, Dave? No. Okay.
There's nothing simple about security, that's for sure.
Well, on the business rules, I think that's where it ties into the industrial Internet of Things, is now you're taking much more refined stuff, and then you're comparing it between different smart sensors to see if it's self-consistent. And then you put more probability on things that, if, for example, your electrical draw indicates there's a problem and your acoustic device is indicating there's a problem, then most likely that's a problem then if one device indicates there's a problem and the other one doesn't. So you'd put less probability on something like that. So that's sort of the next step of when I talked about putting the stuff into actionable form, is now forming more of a network, a response surface of these things, such that you can then evaluate what's the probability that this is truly not a normal situation.
Anybody else have any? I've got a couple of questions I'd like to run by Sally. Chuck had mentioned some of the applicable applications that might be of interest to our audience. Are there any others that can benefit from your core technology? Would be of interest?
So the basic core technology is pattern recognition. So the system can look at any type of pattern, and that's why it can be used for things like leak detection, level detection, changes in patterns like in bearings, in turbine engines, things like that. And it mimics how the brain functions. So it mimics the hippocampus in the brain. The value to that is the hippocampus in the brain is what creates long-term memories from short-term memories. So if you have, for example, dementia or some other malfunction like that, we've studied that and then applied it to creating this smart sensor that now can make intelligence out of things that don't typically have that level of intelligence. So there's probably not too many things that you can think of that happen in your operation where you couldn't apply this. And the value of it is when Dave was talking about his comments, it's speed. In less than a second, it's the fastest device out there from a smart sensor. We can detect whatever it is that we've told it we want it to detect, even if it's an anomaly. Just tell me there's something unusual in the pattern of what happens to be going on, whether it's pump levels, whatever that might be. Tell me there's something unusual, so in speed and then to a nano of a granular, I have seen that little detection occur. I'm a former executive from Raytheon, and one of the reasons I was hired to go there is because of leaking into the ground by the Air Force activity, frankly, not the company. But it was polluting the ground. And one of the things that, of course, I learned in that process is, leaking can take, 6 months to be determined that there's leaking going on because it's so fine. And when that leaking occurs, you're shut down now. You've got an EPA issue, and you've been shut down for some long period of time because you've got to deal with that issue. So there's all kinds of applications that if you think about your processes and think about, does it have a pattern? What might that pattern be? You're going to get speed. Its ability to localize is plus or minus 1 degree. It's also, that beats military specs. Military specs are plus or minus 2 to 3 degrees. And so it can narrow in to exactly where something has happened and do it with great speed. So, your imagination, as, Chuck was saying, let your imagination go wild. The opportunities are endless. There's just a million things that it could do. So it doesn't have to be gunshot. I think the value to a system that has the ability to do both security and operational impact is huge, because now you've got an asset that has multi-purpose. It's not just one type of asset that you're investing in, right? It's like buying cameras. I tell every municipality around the world, you could buy cameras forever, but for the most part, unless you make them smart, they're not always going to be where you want them to be, right? It's no different than some of the other kinds of systems that you have. So the applications are endless. Let your imagination go wild.
Anybody there have a question? Okay. Another one I want to follow up with Sally is the technology is pretty fascinating. And what's the ability of it to work in various environments, above ground, below ground, et cetera? What's the capabilities there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, the benefit to the commercial world, so just quick background. When this all started, the original core technology was being funded by DARPA. And the purpose of the DARPA funding, if you're familiar with DARPA, is very long-term, way out into the outer space limits of what can happen someday. And at that point, it was really about speech recognition. We then, continued to support the DoD for developing the technology for other types of things, and learned very quickly that, like the fence sensor that you saw, that fence sensor has the ability to be above ground, below ground, underwater, and operate with the same precision as it does indoors, anywhere else that you might have it on a street pole. It has exactly the same sort of functionality. And, again, because it's like an extreme version of a smart sensor. Mimicking the brain means that there is so much happening in that sensor, so much processing going on of information and doing the analyzing and the other types of things. So it can go underwater. We've tested it for, sites where dam operations for both underwater, above ground. We've tested it at the end of of jetways for, you've got jet wash blowing all over it. Does it affect its performance? No, it doesn't care. Does it care about the train that's, 2 miles away? No, it doesn't care. Does it care about F-16s flying over site? Nope. But it's still going to do what it's supposed to do, whether it's, again, above ground, underground. It's multiple applications. It's okay, you can ask whatever you want.
Could you talk about the millimeter heat ray? I'm really curious about that.
We can zap you.
So far, they tell me 11,000 or so people have been exposed to it, and there's only been 2 minor injuries with it way back when it was started. A couple of second degree, first degree, maybe a little second degree with a blister or something like that. But if you want to see if how it feels, I probably can arrange the opportunity. I'm working with the military's non-lethal weapons program now to see about getting it converted over for civilian use to protect critical infrastructure. It's not to go hunting people down with it, right? The idea is to use it as a last resort to, it's to avoid using kinetic lethal technology. But it's about, I think it's 95 gigahertz. So it will only penetrate your skin by 1/64 of an inch, and so that's good. It won't cook you, and it heats you up to about 130 degrees instantly. The longest anybody's been able to just stand there has been 5 seconds. 99.9% of the people can't stand it more than 3 seconds. And the Raytheon, former Raytheon exec over here, she probably has one over at her house somewhere or something, I guess. But she knows a lot about it also.
Tim, not to inject, but I was going to suggest you might want to talk to them a little bit about the demonstration at TECO, because that kind of put all the pieces together.
Oh, absolutely. So at Tampa Electric, over in the Tampa Bay area, what we did was we demonstrated those beam systems you're talking about. We actually put them all, except the millimeter wave, we didn't put that on, but we put a laser dazzler, the long-range acoustical device, and a 12 million candle power light that has the ability to spotlight, to strobe, and to floodlight. And they can all be used. They're on a platform, a robotic platform. And so what we're doing is we were running Sally's Safety Dynamics Sentry system, the one you saw up here. We're running that where it whirled around and put the camera right on on folks. Well, we can whirl around again and we can put those beams. And so what we did was we demonstrated against their anti-terrorism forces. They volunteered to do that, and they came at the system, and they were not able to overcome it. But the beauty is to be able to target acquisition was really good, because we're as we continue to integrate, we will integrate it so fully that it will, every time they move, kind of a thing, it'll just keep reacquiring the target every time they shoot. So if someone sniper pulls a trigger from a half a mile away, or say 800 meters of a large caliber weapon, within that second or so of that sound wave getting there, we can then put those beams on the shooter, so they shouldn't be able to shoot the second time. And that'll be real important. Might save some lives, definitely save infrastructure, and should stop the attack immediately. But yeah, we've actually proven it in the field. They were quite impressed. So we're moving forward with that.
It's really, I thought it was pretty futuristic. You're talking George Jetson, that millimeter heater thing. That sounds like it's pretty fascinating. So
in a lot of respects, the process control world is pretty similar, in the sense that the basic steps of physical security and process control is that you need to sense, you need to communicate that measurement, that event, you have to assess that event, and then you have to respond to that on there. So the basic steps on setting up a security system or setting up a process control are pretty similar. And what's exciting is Now with this sort of network of smart devices, your ability to measure, to communicate, and more importantly to assess is much richer. So you have just a number of inputs that you can then make a more informed a decision on.
Okay, I'd like to take one follow-up question on that to Sally. Wondering if your technology can interface with other access control systems, be integrated and or fused with other technologies or sensors? If so, what has been done?
So the answer is yes. We integrated with a number of systems, but examples of that would be video analytics, license plate recognition, facial recognition. For example, dams in India there's everywhere, huge. They have access control badges for the general public for certain areas. Breaches in those kinds of systems, the system is able to, if we pick up something, either it picks up something or we pick up something, then fusing that back together again to make that intelligent decision of that's a breach. It's a breach of some sort. Federal Reserve Bank, we're in the Federal Reserve banks, and in those banks, when the system detects an explosive sound. So when you think of gunshot, you might be thinking street weapons. Explosive sounds in its brain is anything that has the waveform pattern of an explosive sound. And an explosive sound is so distinct that it has a huge rise and a peak and then a very quick downslide. And so it's going to pick up anything, enemy, whatever it happens to be, it's going to pick it up. In the case of the Federal Reserve Bank, if it picks it up, it's sending its alerts to the Ingersoll Rand access control system and locking down the bank. More importantly for that bank, it shuts down the banking system. So it also helps you see the story of it cannot have high false alarm rates or the banking system would be shut down every other day, because there's a number of things that could be considered confusing with what you might think from the human ear is like and similar to an explosive sound. But we've had those in operation probably since about 2008. And they're indoors, so it's indoors, outdoors, it doesn't really matter. If you think about your complexes like our little cities, whether it doesn't matter what's there, and in that complex you have the same vulnerabilities that any city has. And so if you look at them and you think about what else do I have, what else could it do? Could it turn out, could it initiate the fire alarm system? Could it initiate your sprinkler system? Could it do anything that it can, anything that'll take our alerts, we can do it, and we can do it simultaneous to when we've moved a camera, moved a turret on a tank. I mean, we move turrets on tanks for the military to plus or minus 1 degree. We're spot on fire. You want a fire, that's where it came from, go for it. So it's integration with other systems, absolutely, just about anything you can think of.
Yeah. If no one else in the audience has it, I just have a quick follow-up with Dave. Is what would you see are one of or some of the greatest blocks to the adoption of smart sensors? And converse to that, what do you see are the obviously you kind of talked a lot about the greater, some of the drivers, but any other drivers are either downstream, upstream that you can.
Yeah, I think what we have to fundamentally assess is if the current infrastructure that we have in the process control world can, in terms of infrastructure and even process, can really assimilate and make use of all this new information. So we just stand a chance of if we try to just drop these smart devices into our traditionally designed process control networks, we're probably standing a good chance of putting that network at risk because it just simply wasn't ever designed for the type and the amount of data that's being generated by these devices. The second thing is trying to get that information to the right people in the right form, in the right at the right time is a real challenge, because if it gets stranded somewhere between the end user and the device because of this infrastructure limitation, then like then it might be by the time you get the information, it's too late. So I would say that would be probably the key challenge of really, deploying these smart devices at scale.
All right. I guess I could ask Sally and Chuck to sort of, if you were able to talk about any challenges that you might be seeing, but more importantly, what do you see are the key things that you think that will facilitate adoption of this type of technology and other types of smart sensors? That from your perspective, is it basically once you've got people to view the technology, see how it performs, it's pretty much it's a no-brainer for them? Or what do you see as the sort of the level of adoption today, and what type of a near-term, say, 24 to 36-month horizon do you think is going to be any kind of comments in that regards to adoption?
You want to start, Sally?
Sure. Well, first of all, in terms of adoption, so those of you, let's go back in time. I think the first gunshot detection systems that went out sometime around 1999. I don't think anybody had a clue. I don't think that there was any real concept for the type of smart sensors that we're talking about until sometime around 06, 08. What is it like today? Well, you can't keep up with the pace because there is just so, as I don't remember whose slide it was, but the comment about everything's at risk today, unfortunately. When you get calls from, the intel agencies and you're thinking, wow. I mean, they communicated a scenario to me that said they tested a scenario of an active shooter in a complex. This is protected by military people all over the place. Took them an hour and a half after the first shot was fired to find the shooter. That's in the intel agency. So what's adoption today? I don't think we can respond fast enough. It's the Department of Energy, it's Sandia Labs, it's not just the cities worrying about it. They all are getting that this is really, really important and that there is a natural tie to the rest of their systems. So I would say adoption has gone up at a rapid pace. To Dave's point, I think what's important, and we all preach this, I know we do, deployment is what's important, is how do you deploy it, understanding how it's going to fit in with your systems, understanding, thinking through the scenarios that are possibilities, and making sure that the information is going to the right people at the right time. So it isn't that the technology is not there, it's just making sure that it's used properly. Otherwise, it's just another node, and it becomes a dumb node because it wasn't properly deployed. And having the smart intelligence to the right people at the right time is really what this is all about. And I think the value, and I don't think I really knew this until I started working with Dave, thinking about the industry that you all are in, is that the value of this system is it only gives you information when it's of value. It's not streaming everything to you. So, when you think about people that are in command centers and receiving information, whether they're in the process side of the business, operations side, or they're in the security side of the business, they've got, monitors all over the place of what they're trying to manage and what they're trying to look at. Well, thank God, at least the systems that we're talking about only feed info when it's important, right? And so then it's just about training them. It's all those things that Chuck's organization does an amazing job at helping people to think through all of that so that you've thought, okay, when is the right time for me to get this intelligent and who really needs it? That's probably the hardest part. It isn't that the stuff doesn't exist. It exists. It's just how do you deploy it?
And so, what you want is like we talked about, using the sensors for multiple purposes. Our CTO likes to say we need to harvest the latent capability of the existing systems. So all of us have, security systems, we have process control systems, this, that, and the other. There's a lot of latent capability in that, and I think that's really what Dave has been pushing, and I think that's what this session's all about, is leveraging, so harvest what you have now and then add those sensors, bring those in, and then decide how you're going to manage that. We, all the way back to the first question with regard to how do you know how to put this all together, and we talked, what about the unattended things, and, there's modeling stuff. So that really, we have everything we need out there right now to, your imagination can run, and really it's all doable now. But, there are regulations that are coming out that are forcing the chemical industry and the power industry to do, security upgrades, significant security upgrades. These substations are going to be $2 to $3 million to $4 million to upgrade those. And so it needs to be done right, but there's an opportunity there to repurpose some of these sensors or multi-purpose these sensors and use them for different things, and get some return on investment out of them besides just security. So get some ROI.
I wanted to ask you, Dave, a follow-on to the adoption, about what type of adoption growth, if you will, do you see for smart sensors in the downstream?
I think we're already here. I think a lot of times what's happened is that the smart sensors are simply turned off, and that data is stranded. In the opening, remarks, you alluded to that. And so I think what we're actually seeing is that there's actually quite a bit of smart sensors that are already commercially available, but we just simply, so it's not so much the adoption of the physical device, but it's the changing of our behavior to sort of be able to harvest that latent potential that are in these devices. I'm going to borrow that term from now on, too.
Right. Everybody likes that term.
Yeah, because I think that's the key challenge here, is that we're actually here. We just haven't learned how to leverage that stuff to improve, the reliability.
Okay, great. That was, as we at ARC, when we talk about looking at IIoT, and like we're just coming out with a strategy report at the end of this month on upstream oil and gas, and that what's going on there, but a lot of the components of IIoT are already existing, as you well know, Dave, in the oil and gas industry. A lot of this has already been done in various projects, but I think it's tying it all together and leveraging what's already out there. And I think what you said about the smart sensor and why it's not being adopted, I was going to say work process, but culture. I don't know what human nature, inertia. I don't know what it is, but I think that the tremendous benefits that can be leveraged through these technologies are pretty fascinating. So does anybody else in the audience? I mean, we could talk about this all day long, but I don't know.
I'd like to say one thing. Workshops, getting together in workshops, developing, a program of looking at this and working through workshops is a really good way to do it. Get everybody together, get everybody to sensor fuse their own brains, together and create something, and then decide where you need to go from there. And get folks from all the different walks of life within your company to participate in that, and you'd be amazed at what you come up with.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think it's pretty fascinating, and I don't know if they're going to. I'm not in any rush. I don't have to leave until noontime. So, but if anybody here has any other questions, welcome them to. If you want to come up afterwards and grab one of the folks that has been talking today, and I'm trying to think of one last. I guess I'll just kind of wrap it up by saying, any final thoughts or key things that you would like people to walk away from this session and this presentations and discussions, and the people that are still here. What are the key final thoughts that you want to just sort of nail home and say 2 minutes or less each? So, Sally, you want to start?
Of course. I'm the guinea pig today, apparently. Here's what I would say is in your organizations you have a tremendous amount of existing resources, intellectual resources, physical resources. You have assets all over the place. I would just say, kind of tagging on to what Chuck said, it's don't be afraid to have those group discussions about where you might be able to go with all of this, and don't be afraid of kind of going to the edge of what might be something that seems a little unusual but different for your environment, but being willing to kind of look at it deeply enough to see if it has some value to you, because I think we tend to, I guess what disturbs me most is seeing, you know, I know I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, seeing dumb mechanical cameras everywhere, because that's what it is. And you know, we seem to have this obsession today of having cameras everywhere, and it isn't that they shouldn't be everywhere. It should be making sure that there's the right intelligence that's helping feed those cameras, and that you're getting really what you can. And I guess what I'm saying is you also have other assets in your organizations that if you thought about them long enough, you might be able to add some intelligence to those. That's how we run our business, meaning our ground sensor is a simple seismic sensor that's used in the mining industry. All we did was add brains to it. Our fence sensor is an accelerometer. Accelerometers are used for all kinds of things, right? We added our brains to it, and now we know that someone's scaling that fence. They're not, they haven't kicked it, they're not leaning up against it, the wind isn't blowing it. That's like a $300 little sensor. It's so inexpensive. So think about what that, so I'm just, you know, stretch your imagination about what do we already have? What do we already have that we can increase? Because if I was your CEO, I'm going to ask you that question. What's my return? And if all I'm getting is, you know, a camera to create my security, for example, perhaps that's not such a good decision. And think about what you already are putting investment money into, and how can you get a greater return for that by making it more intelligent.
Dave or Chuck?
These smart devices has the opportunity to improve plant performance, but we need to make sure that we have to rethink the network architecture to make sure it can handle this new class of data. We need to make sure that we put in systems and processes to be able to act upon this data, to be able to interpret and act on it. And the third thing is that we need to make sure that we have the ability to safely and robustly push these business rules out to the edge and be able to manage them at scale. And if we can overcome those three challenges, I think there's a huge amount of potential out there.
So, and I would say, my buddy Alvin Toffler would say, you know, you get power through three different things. You know, the ability to bring violence on people, you know, financial capability, and then knowledge. And so knowledge and the ability to manage information is the most powerful. So I don't think it's a stretch to try to get your organizations to create a high-level champion in the organization to champion this particular thing, because it is happening. There's no avoiding it, and those who capitalize on it will get the best ROI and faster.
Great. All right, well, I want to thank my group of esteemed panelists and Dave and Chuck for speaking as well. I'd like to thank you all for staying with us through the course of a great session, I think, and hopefully you took some good information away. And certainly, again, I encourage you, if you have time if they have time, to come up and speak to them as you would like to, or get contact information. I think there's a lot of, I think the way when I first started to talk to Sally about the possibility, I was kind of, but then as I used my imagination to kind of think about how this technology and the things that she started talking about, I really started to see this is really some interesting things, because it's not, don't just think about, you know, a limited little thing about security. I mean, that's important, but there's other, if you've heard some of the information conveyed, there's other types of applications that could benefit from this type of technology. So I encourage you to stretch your imaginations and go back to your folks at your companies and at the very least get the discussion going, get the seed planted about, you know, if you're using smart sensors today, are we fully maximizing their capabilities and their functionality? And if not, why not? And try to take action to that. And certainly if you're not using smart sensors nearly as much as you can, then shame on you. And I hate to say you should be get off the dime and get going. So once again, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the forum. And again, please give a welcoming hand to my panelists.